Hello dear viewers, how are you doing? I made this video as a tribute to one of my favorite weapons in War of the Roses game, the Claymore. So let's start. And start with the open beta. Yes, I'm talking about that time when we received 1000 experience points for executions and 1500 points for revives. When I started playing the game, my first aim was to generate enough coin to open the last custom build. Because it had the peasant face, we couldn't change faces during that time, and peasant face build was the most expensive one. I don't know why, but you know, we ought to have the best. So when first custom build slot was finally unlocked, everyone bought the weapons he liked most. For me it was Claymore because I simply love two-handed swords, yes. When I started using one, I was not disappointed with its power. It definitely was effective. It was a relatively easy to use weapon, we all agree on that. And because before I was playing Mountain Blade, where I used two-handed swords a lot, it was easier for me to adapt to the new game mechanics. And the game, of course, was just awesome. We tested it and had a lot of fun during the process. I find it hilarious now that the first weapon I ever bought for my custom build was the first weapon considered as overpowered and eventually nerfed. August and September passed, and on the 2nd of October 2012, game was officially released. It was the time when me and Hashashin made our first War of the Roses movie. My custom build started to get rich diversity in weapons and armor sets, but some players, well, they still stick to the two-handed swords. And no wonder, the weapon was really powerful. The real pain was to fight several Claymore swordsmen at the same time, and I think that was the main reason why this weapon was classified as the overpowered. But there is cure for any disease, and for this one it was the heavy armor, which was even more overpowered. So one of my custom builds was this overpowered beast with heavy armor and two-handed sword. The funniest thing is that if enemy had the same setup, the duel between two could last for a really long time. I'm sorry to interrupt the action, just want to add a commentary about free shield icons you just saw. It's because of the Toledo steel of the sword that allowed to penetrate several enemy body parts, but deflection was still present because it's overpowered heavy armor! So if you know about the fact that 99.9% of the players during that time period were wearing heavy armor, you might ask, why nerf Claymore? Well, you can actually aim with the sword, surprise! And if you hit the open face, BAM! I know it's the open face area, yes, but it's the Milanese style and the hit was half charged. Particular weapons' damage, speed and strike arc allowed it to be both a dual weapon and could also be used to fight several enemies at once. But of course, if you went alone against opponent's party, you had to be prepared to use footwork a lot and not your blocking skills, because time wasted on parrying one hit would be a death sentence to you. Always stayed more offensive, more aggressive playstyle was used with Claymore. That was just one of many reasons why me and many other people had builds with light armors and long-shafted weapons, which were much more interesting to use. And one more thing to add. I think during that time damage was a bit more random. What I'm trying to say is that you could get a different damage numbers while hitting the same place on enemy's body with the same charge. I didn't see any announcements regarding this during that time or the time when it disappeared from the game. But when it was present, it brought a lot of realism to the action. That, combined with several other features game had at that moment, made this period unique and unforgettable. For the ending of this sequence, enjoy the killstreak with Claymore and original soundtrack. The most observant viewers have probably already spotted the difference between the Claymore before and after the official game release. Quatrefoils on the forward-sloping arms of the guard were removed. Pommel's appearance was changed as well, from the globe-shaped to the wheel-shaped one. As you have already guessed, this wasn't made for game designer amusement. The reason why particular decoration part is no longer present is game's historical accuracy. The War of the Roses were fought in several sporadic episodes between 1455 and 1485, but the typical Highland Great Sword was made in Scotland almost a century later. And so the Claymore's appearance was changed to fit the War of the Roses time period. This, of course, was made using historical data and particularly the information that probably the stylistic ancestors of the later two-handed Highland swords were medieval types of the half-length sword. But as everyone found out later, the awesome look of the Claymore was just the first part taken from it.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
The day everyone will remember, 16th of October 2012, day when Claymore was nerfed, or should I say over-nerfed? To back this up, I want you to pay attention on how many players actually using Claymore you will see during the following video fragments. And of course, I can't forget to mention all the angry commentaries, threads on forums and Steam pages of the game. Even players who were waiting for this nerf to happen didn't expect Claymore will be nerfed so much. It might be hard for you to say if the Claymore was really underpowered using the following footage presented here, because to say that you need to compare its power with the other weapons present during that time, especially one-handed swords that were at least twice more effective. And I will give you this opportunity in the end of this sequence. But you can already see two factors that made Claymore the worst choice as a primary weapon for any player. First is its low damage against light armor, and second was its unique thrust system. In this game, swords ought to dominate light armor, but nerfed Claymore was either dealing pitiful amount of damage or even worse, bouncing of clothes. The push action that some time ago was dealing damage when you use it was in some cases a more effective offense tool, dealing at least 20 damage to light armored opponents. Second problem Claymore users were facing during that time was its new thrust mechanics introduced to particular weapon only. It was awesome and awful at the same time. I hope you know, but if you don't, thrust or downwards attack as it's called in the game, or stab attack, is the best attack against plate armor. It doesn't mean it will deal more damage, but it has higher chances of penetrating enemies' armor than side swings and overhead swings. So why do we see all these blue shield icons when I was using only stab attack to deal with my heavy armored opponent? Well, we need to take into consideration fact that Claymore could bounce of light armor, meaning it would bounce twice as much of any medium armor type. It means that heavy armor users were virtually invulnerable to Claymore attacks, even the stab attack. Before I continue, I want to show you this impressive hit that I made during that time. 1 damage. I mean, that's good, that's good. I mean, 99 more hits and I'll kill that guy, right? So, how could players overcome these difficulties? Except of using dirty tricks and pushing enemies off the buildings? Of course, whole-grain steel was essential during that time period. As I already told, a lot of players were using heavy armor. But main trick was to understand how to use Claymore properly to get the best results. Well, the secret is easy to understand, but was not so easy to implement during most cases. War of the Roses game has realistic physics. It means that damage you will deal with your weapon will always be affected by your and your enemy's speed difference. Which means that with Claymore it was essential to get some speed before making a hit. You could be good at blocking. You could be good at aiming your attacks. But if your footwork was bad, the Claymore in your hands was less effective than a wooden stick. And as promised, the final stroke to prove the Claymore was really underpowered. As you see, I'm using just one-handed sword, so So yes, as soon as I get into the tower, I see this player using the Claymore. I was so astonished, I just stopped there and started to write like, wow, Claymore! But he already switched to the battle axe. Well, any more questions or doubts? No? I thought so. But there always will be people denying the obvious. Here are some of the rare messages I found.
I use Claymore the 100% of the time and I think it is good as it is right now.
For the record, the two-handed swords would never do any damage and defeat a small amount of blood as swinging can play.
Developers commented on this saying that they did not nerf the weapon, just made it only for the skilled users and won't revert anything back. But soon you will see that nothing is true and everything is permitted. And so, Claymore as a weapon of choice was forgotten for almost 4 months. There were tries to revive particular weapon category popularity, such as Winter Has Arrived update in the end of December, when second two-handed sword was introduced, the Sword of Veneration of Christmas. But it was still just a very good-looking decoration part. Until one day, on January 23rd, 2013, when Paradox and Fat Shark made their move. Gallowglass patch with revamped armor. In the other words, two-handed swords were now penetrating everything like butter. Particular event was like an apocalypse. No one ever thought it will happen. And even though it felt wrong, it was a very pleasant experience to use Claymore again. But it was even more overpowered than during the open beta or release versions of the game. And as if that wasn't enough, one of the default profiles called Guardsman was changed from a crossbowman to a brute with Claymore. That was followed by a demo version release on the 6th of February, where all default profiles were unlocked, including the Guardsman. As you have probably already guessed, it didn't take much time to see servers filled with Guardsman classes. Of course, there were a lot of custom builds as well, with a two-handed sword. But it were still 2 weeks before demo version was released. So what we saw during this time was a custom two-handed sword build invasion, which was just a start of the madness that followed. Also, a lot more players started to use medium and light armors, because heavy armor became less effective, which was just a gift for the great sword spammers. A lot of anger was focused on people who used two-handed swords during that time. Not without reason, I guess, but as game history tells us, there will always be classes that don't require much skill to use. On 6 February, demo version is released and two-handed sword damage was a bit nerfed. I mean, really just a bit. It was made to satisfy whiners on the forums, rather than actually nerfing the weapon. During that time we made our Fiery Sword movie. Don't forget to check it out if you haven't yet, to get a bit more understanding about the situation with a great sword during that time. But in a few words, it was a weapon that did not require much skill to use and was extremely powerful in the hands of experienced player. That's why this small fight happened between new players who just joined the game. They thought that Claymore is a balanced weapon and there is no need to change anything about it, and veteran players on the other side who understood the problem and saw nerf as the only option to deal with particular balance issue. But always remember, no matter how good you are in melee combat, nothing can save you from the evil crossbowman sniper. After a month and a half, on the 21st of March, Paradox gave birth to the Kingmaker Edition. With 8 new greatswords introduced, we now had a total of 10 weapons of mass destruction to choose from. Scottish sword thrust damage was reduced and change-up time was extended, which gave a bit balance to the situation with the guardsman classes, but for everyone else who made their own custom builds with greatswords, well, we were too busy testing other options during that time. But we all know that the best feature of that update was Brian Blast voiceover.
Drive out the Yorkish dogs! Oh! Row, row! Drive them out!
After 2 months, a day after my birthday on 29th of May, a Swiss patch was released. It was a great gift for everyone and later was considered a best balanced patch up to date by many people. And considering greatswords, well, they became almost perfect. An exploit with dragging stabs into heads was fixed, which was a great step towards the balanced greatswords and weapons overall. Two-handed swords were revamped. I must mention it was done wisely. The damage was lowered only versus plate and mail, meaning the great swords were a devastating power against any light armored opponent, but at the same time you could be a fearsome opponent even for the frogmouth turtle. A lot of different setups were possible. You could select Imperial fighting style and hologrind shape of your blade to be able to cut even through plate armor. Or you could select Milanese fighting style and apply convex to it to devastate any light armored opponent. Or maybe you want something balanced, then you take standard fighting style and apply any grind you want, depending on the result you want to get. Greatsword reach makes them a best counter versus small reach weapons such as Executioner's Axe or Warhammer, leaving your opponents almost no chances to win against you. If one puts Imperial fighting style on his sword and learns to aim and strike to the opponent's neck, easy decapitations become possible, which means a lot of fun for the greatsword user. High damage of the stabs is also very satisfying. The only drawback of a greatsword at the moment is that it doesn't have the quick swing option. You can't do fast, low damaging hits to overcome skilled opponents' parry defense. If you will try to do uncharged hit, it will be a very slow swing, and if parried, you will be left in stun for several seconds completely undefended, meaning only charged hits and a lot of footwork is required. Nevertheless, feinting does the trick. Use it and you should be fine. Yet still, I would not recommend to take two-handed sword on 1 versus 1 fight. But if you have at least 2 opponents on one side, no matter on yours or the enemy, your chances of success will increase tenfold. If you are a new player and want to use the greatsword, aim for the light armored opponents. It might be hard to get through the enemy plate armor, but there is completely no excuse to lose against the light armored enemy. When facing any opponent, aim for the head, and you will be fine. I will let Lynn Thompson to sum it up for me.
The greatsword is way underappreciated in my opinion. A big sword like this can make it look easy to make that difficult cut.